What's up, guys? This is the host, and today I have a creepypasta written by a user called concrete_raccoon. I hope you enjoy. Old VHS tapes were scattered about in the asylum's security office. On the newest tape, time-stamped only hours earlier, they watched themselves walking into the building. The asylum had been abandoned for decades. At least, that's what we'd heard. My friend Evan was obsessed with urban exploration, and against my better judgment, I tagged along. We slipped through a rusted side door, flashlights cutting thin beams through the dust-choked air. The silence was thick, broken only by the crunch of glass under our boots. We found the security office almost by accident. Rows of old monitors lined the walls, their screens dead and cracked. On the desk sat a stack of VHS tapes, the labels faded or missing. It felt wrong, like someone had been here recently, reorganizing them. Evan, always the curious one, slid the top tape into a half-broken player. The static gave way to grainy footage of a long hallway. The time stamp read 1998. We leaned in as shapes flickered on screen. A night guard making his rounds, patients shuffling past with blank faces. Nothing unusual for a place like this. Nothing to make my skin crawl, which was lucky because it would have been hard to move if it had. Evan pressed play again. The tape rewound, his face inches from the screen. Suddenly, the guard on the screen stopped mid-step, turning to look directly at the camera. His expression wasn't angry or surprised. He just stared, unmoving, for nearly a full minute, as though he knew someone would be watching years later. We fast-forwarded through several tapes, each one more unsettling than the last. In one, patients stood in a perfect circle in the courtyard, facing inward, motionless. In another, the lights in the hallways flickered wildly while no one was there. Then we found a tape with today's date scrawled on it. My stomach dropped. Evan just grinned like we'd struck gold. He shoved it into the player, and static gave way to something that made my blood run cold. It was us walking through the asylum's front gates, flashlights in hand. The time stamp was less than 2 hours ago. We watched ourselves moving through the halls, entering rooms we hadn't even been in yet. Then the footage jumped ahead, showing us walking toward the security office, toward the very room we were sitting in. On screen, we entered the office, but in the reflection of one of the dead monitors, there was something behind us, a tall, distorted figure, its head bent at an impossible angle. Evan laughed nervously, insisting it had to be an old recording. But when the footage reached the current time, the VHS didn't stop. It showed us sitting exactly where we were watching the tape. Only now the figure was standing closer, just behind our chairs. That was when we heard it. A faint click, the unmistakable sound of another VHS tape sliding into the player on the shelf behind us. We didn't look back. We just ran. And yeah, that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like. If you want to hear more creepypastas, stay tuned. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Hello, I'm here today to talk about this story titled The Shadow Man, which is actually written by one of our users, Messed Up beyond belief. So let's dive right into it. And we find ourselves in the first person. We are with our two friends. Our friend Evan is setting up his camera, and our friend Claire has a flashlight, and we are together exploring an abandoned old hospital. It's actually a place that the author went to as a kid, and he hadn't been back since. He says it was originally built in the late 1800s and served as a Civil War hospital, and that it had been shut down for about 30 years. It smelled very faintly of mildew and some kind of metallic scent that stuck at the back of his throat. They walked past rooms with beds and instruments still inside. One room contained a dentist's chair where someone had recently carved their initials, perhaps hoping to be immortalized forever. He wondered if they'd found anything interesting yet. Continuing down the hall, they reached the surgical wing, the last room before they planned to leave. They entered the operating room, and it felt suddenly much colder and heavier. The circular arrangement of the room and high ceilings made it feel like a Roman Colosseum. Rust had eaten through the operating table, and an old lamp hung above, swaying from a rusty chain. Evan set up his camera and started talking into it, saying that this was the surgical wing. After 30 years, it looks like nothing has been disturbed. As he's speaking, Claire begins sweeping her flashlight around the room, and the dust in the beam sparkles and drifts lazily like ash. At this point, we get a paragraph where the author gives us some more background on the history of the hospital, and then we return to the scene. They start to speak about how the town and the hospital were named after the man who owned the land, and the hospital had treated Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. It said that people died and never left. Then the author interrupts himself because he heard a noise. They all looked at each other, and he saw a slight grin on Claire's face. She insisted that she had not made the noise, but the three of them stood listening for a moment. It fell silent again, and then the author decides to continue filming, and they go back to talking about the history of the place. After a few moments, Claire tells Evan that she wants to leave. She seems uncomfortable now, and the author says that he can't blame her. The author tells us that he often gets a bad feeling about a place, but mostly that means that he picks up his things and leaves. But this time, the hair on the back of his neck prickled, and he could unshake the feeling that they should leave. Evan finishes up his spiel about the history, and then starts panning the camera toward the table once more. The author says that it probably looked better than it did when it was used to hack people to pieces, but it still looked creepy. Suddenly, the author feels something brush against his leg, and he jumps. Claire gasps and moves away from him, backing away slowly. She whispers to the others that she wants to get out of there, and the author says that she doesn't have to tell him twice. They hurry toward the door, passing the row of chairs as they leave the room. Then we get a little bit of an interruption. It tells us that for the past hour, they had been walking through this maze of halls, going up and down stairs, and finding more and more bizarre things, including bloodstains on the floor, a boy's body bag, X-ray films in the basement labeled things like pathological fracture and gunshot wound. Now we return to the operating room, where they are rushing out the door. We get a couple of sentences telling us that the author could see the hallway and the door out of the corner of his eye, and he could see that they were getting far away from the surgical wing. He could feel the hairs on his arms and neck stand on end. He kept his eyes on the door. All of a sudden, heavy footsteps began coming toward them from the other end of the hallway. They were loud and menacing. All three of them stopped and listened. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a dragging sound, like someone was dragging themselves along the floor. They turned and stared at the door. Then they ran. When they finally get outside, catching their breath, Evan checks the footage, and the last clip shows the three of them running for the exit. As they watch, the camera swings back toward the operating theater and shows someone standing in the doorway. The figure stands perfectly still, and its head is cocked, as if watching them leave. At this point, the story ends. No, overall, I really liked this story. I think it was really well written and paced. It hooked me right away, especially that opening line. While filming in the surgical wing, their camera caught a figure. I thought that was a great opening hook. The entire story is told from the first-person perspective of the narrator, keeping me involved and engaged and making me feel like I was right there exploring this abandoned hospital with them. It does a great job of building suspense, starting with the unsettling descriptions of the hospital and the gradual progression to more disturbing discoveries. The author skillfully builds tension throughout the story, culminating in the terrifying encounter with the footsteps and the shadowy figure. The ending is also very effective. Leaving the story open to interpretation makes it even scarier because we don't know what exactly happened. Was it a ghost? Was it something more sinister? That ambiguity is what makes this tale truly terrifying. And the ending with the shadowy figure watching them leave is just chilling. There are some parts where the story lags a little bit in the middle. There are long descriptions of the history of the hospital and of the place that I found myself wanting to skip over and get to the action. But overall, I really enjoyed reading this, and I thought it was a well-written and scary story. So that brings us to the next part of the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any future episode. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I'll see you next time.